scared to death of being politically incorrect, scared to death of offending anybody, scared to death of losing their tax exemption, scared to death of someone leaving the congregation and consequently income leaving the congregation. And I tell these pastors, it's about time you stop being concerned about being politically correct and you become biblically correct. And I share with them about our history. You know, you look at the Declaration of Independence. What a wonderful document. Written by a man that has been so maligned and called a deist and called the most ungodly of all the framers. But I'll tell you, if there's one message on that document that Thomas Jefferson wrote, is to exalt our Creator above all things. And I'll tell you, you look at the Declaration of Independence, and you find 17 grievances against King George. I'll tell you something that perhaps some of you may not know. You know that each and every one of those grievances were preached from the pulpits of America before they were written on the Declaration. It was preachers from the pulpit calling out King George for the atrocities that he was perpetrating upon the American people. Where are those pastors today? They're hiding behind their pulpits. Now there are a few that are speaking out, but it's a small minority. And you know, we have been fed a lie about the secularism of America. As a matter of fact, I want to tell you about the second so-called deist. You know who he is? Benjamin Franklin, right? Those are the two that the liberals, the progressives, like to talk about. They call them the ungodly framers, the deists. Let me tell you about Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin, the Constitutional Convention had been going on for about 4 weeks. And it was falling apart. I mean, they were at each other's necks. Because every colony wanted their proposal. And after 4 weeks of this thing, Madison was ready to go home and I was falling apart. And it was Benjamin Franklin that gets up and addresses the president of the convention, none other than George Washington. And he says, "Sir, how is it that we have not once called upon the Father of lights to illuminate our understanding? Or have we forgotten when we started this struggle against Great Britain, how we met in these very chambers for prayer, seeking His protection and direction? Those prayers were graciously answered. Or do we feel that we no longer need His assistance? Sir, I have lived a long life. And the longer I live, the more assured I am of this fact, that God governs the affairs of men." Yes. That's not the statement of a deist. A deist is someone that says, God created the universe and then He said, okay, have at it. Yeah. But Franklin continues, and he says, if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, is it probable that we can build an empire without his aid? As the Holy Scriptures tell us, unless the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. And he said, if we proceed to build this without Him, we will fare no better than the builders of Babel. And then he said, concluding, I beseech you therefore, my brethren, that from now and henceforth, before we proceed with our deliberations, we meet in these chambers every morning for prayer, seeking his wisdom and direction. They left the Constitutional Convention that day, and they all gathered at the church of Brother Pastor Witherspoon, one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. They came back the next day in a totally different spirit. And a few short weeks later, they gave us the greatest document that has ever been written outside of the Bible, the Constitution of the United States of America. And you know, that document, along with the Declaration, those two documents have lasted over 2 centuries. And I believe the reason they have lasted over 2 centuries is because they were forged on the knees of the framers. Those framers were seeking revelation from above. And that's what they got. I am convinced that the Constitution of the United States is a divinely inspired document, the same as the Declaration. Let me share something with you. For millennia, the model for government has always been the same. This is a man-made model. And the model has been authority flows from God to the government to the people. I repeat, it's not God's model, it is man's model. Even in the Old Testament, if you read in 1 Samuel chapter 8, the people of Israel came to the prophet Samuel demanding, we want a king just like the other nations around them had a king. And God said to Samuel, Samuel, they're not rejecting you, they're rejecting me. You know, before then, Israel was ruled by judges that rose up from among the people. And now the nation of Israel place themselves under that same man-made model, which is authority flows from God to the government to the people. And throughout history, kings and tyrants have used that model to oppress the people and to justify their oppression upon the people. Their reasoning is like this: I have the right to oppress you because my authority comes from God. But you see, when those framers were on their knees, seeking revelation from above, divine revelation is what they got. And God gave them a totally different model. No longer authority flows from God to the government, to the people, but rather authority flows from God to the people, to the government. It is imperative that we understand this. The model divinely inspired in the Constitution is not authority flows from God to the government to the people, but from God to the people to the government. All authority under the Constitution is placed upon we the people. It's not coincidental that the first 3 words in the in the Constitution are we the people. All authority is placed upon us. And with that authority comes an awesome responsibility for us to elect righteous leaders. You see, if we understand that that's a divinely inspired model, if we don't elect righteous leaders, we're disobeying God. You know, in the book of Proverbs, chapter 17, verse 15, it says, he that justifies the wicked and he that condemns the just, both of them are an abomination to the Lord. He that justifies the wicked and he that condemns the just. Let me ask you a question. If you're silent, are you not justifying the wicked? Silence is not an option. Pastor Dietrich Bonhoeffer in Nazi Germany said, silence in the face of evil is evil itself. He also said, not to speak is to speak. When we are silent, we're sending a powerful message. We don't give a flip. And that's why America is where it is today, because too many of us have sat in our rear end when we should have been out there in the trenches. So we have a responsibility. You know, so many people of faith across America have said something that I am absolutely certain all of you have heard. Perhaps some of you have even said it. And it is this statement: politics is a dirty business. I don't want any part of it. Have you heard it?
Yes.
I'm not going to ask you if you said it. Politics is a dirty business. I don't want any part of it. And they wash their hands. Well, let me share with you another scripture from the book of Proverbs. It's Proverbs chapter 29, verse 2. And it says, when the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. When the wicked rule, people mourn. Well, if the righteous, the people of faith, the people of principle are not voting, are not even running for office, what is left? The wicked electing the wicked.
That's right.
And we get what we deserve. Now, you know, we get many so-called, quote, people of faith. Well, God put Obama in power. No, God didn't put Obama in power. We put Obama in power by sitting in our rear ends, in our pews, in our churches, instead of going to the voting booth and voting him out of office. Don't blame God for it. God placed that authority upon you in the Constitution. We have a civic and moral responsibility to exercise that responsibility that God placed upon us through the Constitution. So don't blame God. As a matter of fact, you know, I remember a couple of years ago, this happened in two different churches that I was speaking, that I had whole families come forward and say, well, we never voted in our lives because of Romans 13. Because Romans 13 says that God appoints all authority, so why vote? You know what my response was? That's got to be the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. God appoints the office. We elect the person that sits in that office.
That's right.
As a matter of fact, let me share with you that the Bible tells you exactly who to vote for. The Bible tells you very clearly who to vote for. Let me put it in context. Moses has just crossed the Red Sea. And now Moses is in the wilderness trying to govern over 1 million people. And Moses is going bananas. Here comes Jethro, his father-in-law. And Jethro says, Moses, what you're doing is not good. And in Exodus chapter 18, verse 21, God speaks to Moses through Jethro. And God says, you select from among the people. Now I want you to note carefully what God says. You select from among the people. Not God will appoint. No, you select, which is the same as you elect. You select from among the people. And then he gives 4 qualifications. Able men, such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness. Able men, such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness. That's how you vet every candidate. Let me define those terms. First, able men. And women, of course. What does that mean? That means elect men and women that are capable of doing the job. Let's stop electing the village idiot. Number 2, such as fear God. Well, if you fear God, you obey God's commands. We call that in America a Judeo-Christian ethic. What is a Judeo-Christian ethic? Well, first of all, it's a moral code of conduct. And then it is honesty, integrity, hard work, individual responsibility, the rule of law, and yes, free enterprise and limited government. And the Bible has a lot to say about all of these. So able men, such as fear God. Number 3, men of truth. Let me ask you a question. Aren't you sick and tired of men and women of lies in government? I mean, whether it is Fast and Furious, or Benghazi, or the IRS, or the NSA, or Ebola, or the missing emails. It is lies upon lies upon lies. As a matter of fact, they tell you a new lie to cover up the previous lie. I'll ask you another question. Have you ever come across a candidate for public office that will tell you all these wonderful promises of what they're going to do when they get elected, only to get elected and do exactly the opposite? Yes. Anybody had that experience? But you know, that one is easy to fix. Just remember this. Stop listening to their rhetoric and start looking at their record. They all have a record. Stop listening to what they say. Start looking at what they do. Jesus put it this way: ye shall know them by their fruit. It's about time we do some fruit checking.
That's right.
Now there's something else. I was talking to somebody at lunchtime, at dinner time, just a few minutes ago. I was talking to him. And I was saying, look, as I said before, our challenge is with the establishment in both parties. So we need to realize that the primary is even more important than the general. When we have these establishment politicians that are running for re-election, you make sure you have a constitutional conservative running against them in the primary, and then get behind them to throw those guys out. We've got to make sure that we have constitutional conservatives running in every primary election against these people that have been there as relics for 30 years. So able men, such as fear God, men of truth. Number 4, hating covetousness. I'm going to tell you something interesting about covetousness. Covetousness in government is not really primarily about money. It is about power and control. These politicians covet power, and they covet the control that that power gives them over we the people. That's why we have politicians in Washington that have been there for 30 years, and they want to be there another 20. They don't want to relinquish that power. They are drunk with that power. Lord Acton once said, power corrupts. And absolute power corrupts absolutely. But the scripture continues. You select from among the people able men, such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness. And it continues. And appoint them as rulers of 1,000, rulers of 100, rulers of 50, rulers of 10. So here is the model. Moses, rulers of 1,000, rulers of 100, rulers of 50, rulers of 10. That's equivalent to federal government, state government, county government, local government. Verse 22. And only take up to Moses, that is to the federal government, matters of great importance.